I think there is now emerging and a great wealth of evidence around the need to maintain a sense of purpose in life. And that's not just doing the cleaning, but something which makes you feel like you're achieving, that you have goals beyond getting through the day. And certainly we see that, say, post-retirement, empty nesting are all threats for sense of purpose. We have to either regain or refine our sense of purpose when we go through those life changes. There's great evidence to show that people with a sense of purpose have a reduced toll of morbidity and even mortality. One large study of 15,000 or so people in the States showed a 20% reduction in early mortality from heart attacks and strokes for people who declare themselves as having a sense of purpose and being meaningfully engaged in activities which related to that. Likewise, reduction in adverse mental health, in depression and anxiety, and preservation of mental well-being. There are lots of different theories, and none of which have been really proven. A lot of the evidence comes from what we call a cross-sectional study of people at a certain place in time. What fewer longitudinal studies over time can show the effects, but there are perhaps many different mechanisms for that. People who retain their sense of purpose tend to be perhaps more robust and healthier, whether that's as a result or as a result of them having a sense of purpose, or the fact that they have a sense of purpose allows them to do that is unclear. So they tend to be healthier by whatever means. They may then have a reduced level of inflammation in their bodies and reduced levels of stress hormones, which again have an effect on, say, heart disease and stroke and depression and mental health. So there are many different mechanisms whereby retaining a sense of purpose and all of the things that come with that have a positive effect on well-being. Certainly there's a male and female differentiator in that sense of purpose regarding employment. Men are often defined by their employment role in their life, and retirement then becomes a huge challenge in terms of the threat to that sense of purpose, that idea that I am succeeding, I'm meaningful within the world, and I'm achieving things. And it's not, like you said, going out and cleaning the garage every week, or like my grandfather washing his car regardless of whether it had left the garage that week. He was very much a routine kind of guy. Women maybe have a different definition of purpose, where childbearing, motherhood, seeing people through, and then changing that sense of purpose as they might regain a working and economic activity as they get older. So how do we, when our sense of purpose in life is threatened, regain that? And what's been written is reflect on things that you may have given up to achieve that sense of purpose in employment. For instance, taking up new hobbies or new pastimes, things that you'd always fancied doing but had never done because of other perceived restrictions. For instance, personally, medicine is more than just a job. It's a lifestyle. So you give up everything for medicine, and it's only really later on in life, in my great senior years, I've started to rediscover some of those things. So I used to keep bees, and I intend to keep bees in retirement. I gave up fishing for 20 years because medicine was just too busy, and I've now regained that. So the sense of achievement and fulfillment and life satisfaction is balanced off by employment. I think that we've seen an increase in retirement planning and active retirement planning for older people, and that's really important. Just to go to work, get your gold watch, do nothing the next day is very bad. And there will be people who say, oh well, when we're retired we're going to travel, we're going to do X, Y and Z, but they never have done previously. And of course the greatest predictor of future performance is prior performance. So turning lives around is extremely difficult. There is data from psychotherapy around regaining sense of purpose and how one might do that. But that requires intensive psychotherapy over many weeks, and that's often unachievable and maybe undesirable. I think there's some evidence around mindfulness and the practice of social connectedness, which can help people to rediscover new interests or rekindle old interests which they've let go over time. Again, life sense of purpose is that sense of satisfaction and achievement. You might say happiness, but difficult to equate all the time, but very much an internal thing as much as a reaction to external surroundings and circumstances. That undoubtedly mental health has an impact on physical well-being. I think in a previous webinar we talked about the influence of depression on cognitive function and how depression is often called the pseudo-dementia because it affects thinking ability. Now, mental health clearly has an impact on physical health and well-being. If you think about how people might react to, say, depression, they become socially isolated, they go out less, they become less physically active, they may eat more poorly, they may continue with habits which might adversely affect their health, such as smoking. So there's that obvious pathway. We also know, for instance, that depression can lead to things like incontinence or heart disease. So there is a clear link. Maintaining mental health is very important, and we often, as clinicians in later life, neglect the importance of that. Certainly in hospital medicine, mental health is secondary to physical well-being, but often not addressed at the same time, whereas it certainly should be. From a purely clinical medical perspective, we know much more about the benefits of physical exercise on mental health and well-being. We know that you mentioned mindfulness and meditation. I think slightly off the mainstream, but undoubtedly, if you then extrapolate that to cognitive behavioral therapy, which can be self-administered or can be performed with online tutors or remote therapy, then that absolutely has an impact on mental health and well-being. Though for those people living in, say, rural Alberta, mental health, telehealth is part of the staple in terms of maintenance of mental health and well-being. So in terms of the use of telehealth and technology, you can deliver psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, if you like, virtually, and it's been proven to be effective. So it's a very good way of delivering to rural and remote communities and older people who might not have access to in-person therapies. When we talk about depression, of course, anxiety is often seen as the other side of the coin. But there is really no depression with anxiety and no anxiety without some depression. But anxiety can be extremely disruptive to daily life. It's almost like stalling and being able to make a decision, being able, because of your mental state, to be able to conduct life normally. And that itself then raises a stress response. That stress response physiologically can lead over longer term to adverse cardiovascular consequences, but also is perhaps a presage in some people of cognitive decline in later life. It's interesting that often when we're talking to seniors, we meet a few people say, well, look, I'm retired, I've worked all my life, I want to just enjoy myself now. And really, fair enough. It's difficult extrapolating data from populations to individuals, and you can never legislate for what might be poor health choices. We see societal change, say, in smoking, but it's taken decades. And people are often swayed by misinformation around health in the press, and we see, you mentioned bacon. One day bacon might be good for you in small proportions, the next day it's going to send you tumbling into the grave tomorrow. And it's very difficult then to critically analyse those things you see in the lay press. We know around populations that say healthy balanced diets will contain some red meat and some bacon, and people enjoy bacon. You shouldn't give up and have a miserable life. Some people do take health precautions very literally and restrict themselves and do suffer because of that. And are very anti-Oscar Wilde, and maybe moderation in everything is the way to go. So you mentioned gratitude and the idea of gratitude diaries, but actually I suspect that this is just one useful vehicle for the idea of maintaining a positive attitude. And I think that in later life there are data which support that positive frame of mind, again on mental well-being, physical activity, physically connectedness, and social support. We talked, I think, in an earlier webinar about social isolation and loneliness, and how people who are perceived as being isolated may be also perceived as being overly negative. And interactions with those individuals are overwhelmingly perceived, regardless of their content, as negative. So in a way, those Eeyores are made more Eeyore-like as a result of their interactions. So the positive benefits of a positive attitude to life and other people, again, can't be underestimated. Glass half full leads to glass being permanently and less than half full. So we talked about the benefits of purpose in life and positivity on physical disease, and a little bit about its mental health. But of course, the longer term conditions like dementia, maintaining those attitudes in some studies have also shown to be protective or be associated with a much lower likelihood of experiencing dementia in late life. If we talk about, say, the effect of marriage on mental well-being, we know that married people tend to be healthier in terms of longevity, in terms of their cognitive function. There's also some evidence around happiness and marital persistence. That might be, of course, that happy people are more likely to get married and then more likely to get on, rather than marriage making people happier. We've seen, of course, great demographic change in terms of more older people living alone, a rise in divorce in midlife and beyond. So the need to retain social connectedness in the face of that becomes really important. Clearly, after one has overcome a bereavement reaction and the grieving period, then there's a real need to rebuild one's life, and particularly where the death of a spouse has been rather a lingering process with a lot of caregiver duties, people tend to socially isolate themselves and lose those connections, and often don't build them up again, and that's really harmful in my understanding. And it's important for older care partners in that situation not to lose those connections, because they do tend to do poorly if that is the case. So the whole idea of community connectedness, I think we've addressed before, even to religious practice, where the benefit is around that of community and that of support, regardless of one's beliefs about the existence of a higher being.